Okay, so I'm going to try and do a weekly screencast as well. This is just to give you some of the video clips directly and to bring up some of the issues we're going to be talking about in the seminars in the following week. So those are my details. Those are also on the Blackboard slides too. And as I say, I'm going to give you a kind of a reading list each week. Those are some sort of background reading. And then I will go back to Roderick and the globalization paradox a few times during the different weeks. But as I say, I'll give you a reading list each week. Now, I'm not sure if we're going to do an oral assignment, as I said, so we'll leave that. Something we'll also talk to you again in the seminars about. I need some confirmation about whether I can get the money necessary to do it. So I've asked, and we'll find out. I'm waiting an answer at the moment. And there's the exam baby again, and as I say, I'm going to probably divide the exam into two sections, one from section A, first 5 weeks, and one from section B, second 4 weeks. Right, participation. As I say, I'm going to try and do these screencasts now, but it's all about developing your own opinion and perspective. And we will have weekly seminars about key issues and topics. And I can't emphasize enough, really, that the key skill in academia is persuasive argument. You know, you might have, I'm sure you have discussions or arguments with your friends all the time about things like whether Arsenal will win the title because they've got Ozil and all of that, or, you know, whether or not a particular film is any good or a piece of music is any good. But you give kind of reasons. You give reasons to support your answer. And in a sense, that's what academia is about. In a high quality student answer, what you get is students give their own perspective, their own opinion, and they give reasons to support the argument that they develop. And obviously we will have the seminars next week.
I'd like to have...
And I'll leave this stuff out, it's not really essential. So, we were talking about globalization, and what globalization is, and I said it's a complex and uneven process and a contested concept. These obviously, this information is available also on Blackboard on the PowerPoint slides. So I was saying globalization is a process and it's a contested concept with lots of different dimensions. And we looked at Osama bin Laden, or I talked about Osama bin Laden, and you know, he's got the army jacket that was probably made in America, the microphone that was probably made in Austria or Germany, often where these microphones are made, and a Russian Kalashnikov there, and his phone is likely to be Swiss. I think it's a Swiss manufacturer of phone. So that shows that what that does really is it makes a point about this idea that, you know, people who protest about globalization are called anti-globalization protesters. And that's completely the wrong word, because, you know, as you can see, someone who's seen as anti-globalization, corporate globalization, Osama bin Laden, gets a lot of the stuff he wears, or when he was alive, he's dead now, but he uses globalization in order to communicate and to get various goods and to be a part of his particular terrorist network. So this is a point that, you know, anti-globalization is probably the wrong word here. That's all I want to say, really, because those people who are seen as opposed to globalization, like Osama bin Laden, are also a product of globalization. So then we talked about 3 books. Bhagwati's In Defense of Globalization, where he argues that, you know, corporate globalization and capitalism is the best means to reduce poverty and we should have more international trade. Milanovic, who argues that globalization has led to increasing inequalities and there are 2 faces of globalization, and many people have, you know, we see the positive side as rich Westerners, but, you know, there's a lot of poor people on extremely low wages. Over 3 billion people still earn less than $2 a day. And globalization has led to dramatic increases in inequality, particularly as it's been associated with liberalization and the growth in financial markets. Schulte talks about globalization as a change in space. It's a kind of a new spatial configuration. That's not about seeing globalization as a good or a bad thing, but about seeing it as a kind of shift in space, with the emergence of things like the internet and new sort of transnational communication networks. Anyway, so the different dimensions of globalization: economic, cultural, social and political, and financial. And I talk about each of those in the lecture. Cultural globalization first. So McDonald's in Saudi Arabia. And this idea of a franchise, which is when a company gives out its basically a certain piece of expertise or a certain brand name, which then people in a particular country then can use. And Subway, which is, these are the two biggest global franchises. And this is a scholar who was the second president of India. And he's used on a Subway commercial for National Teachers' Day in India. So that gives you an example of cultural globalization and how businesses are shifting in different cultural contexts. So I had this issue of, I wanted to talk about Gangnam Style as an example of cultural globalization because, the music is East Asian, it's sung in an East Asian language, but it's still hugely popular at over 2.36 billion downloads. I'm not going to play it again. Right, economic globalization then first. Multinational corporations. And we've seen a tremendous global concentration of capital with things like Apple, of course, the most valuable company of all time in 2012, Shell, a big oil company, Walmart, the biggest retailer globally, and General Electric, which is the biggest company in terms of foreign assets. So, particularly in energy, we're seeing the largest multinationals. So 7 of the 10 largest multinationals are in energy. And I won't go into too much detail on these because it's all sort of written down really, but BP and General Motors are so large, their GDP is equivalent to countries like Austria and Denmark. And multinational corporations have been able to take advantage of economies of scale, of being able to have massive production facilities and thus make design innovations and new developments of technology and then produce these goods en masse at a very fast rate. And we've seen a huge concentration in global businesses, and that's really a key point, that businesses have become more and more centralized and more controlled by a few firms in a range of different industries, like automobiles and beverages, accounting, and a whole range of others. And this is something, in a sense, this concentration of capital is something Marx predicted. And then I played you a piece from Peter Nolan. You can get that interview on Blackboard, so I won't. It's on the links at the end, the links to video clips at the end of the Blackboard slide. So you can listen to the interviews with Peter Nolan and some of his points about globalization, but also corporate globalization, but also about China. It's worth reading his book too, Capitalism and Freedom. I've got some parts that I've suggested that you might read, which would be a good thing to read for the seminars next week.
We've had 30 years of liberal...
Right. And then I talked about that conflict between Microsoft and Apple. And